When my next guest was 7, she decided she wanted to be a writer and talk about commitment and persistence. That's exactly what she is. Oh, about 5 years later, I think. She must be only 12. I'm sure she isn't very old. Since Dee White has been young, she has travelled around the world in her home searching for stories that she wants to tell. She spent time in Paris researching her latest title, or one of her latest titles, Beyond Belief, which is inspired by a true story, and we're going to find out a lot about that today. She also had a book out in May, same age group, totally different topic, and we're going to talk about that as well. Eddie Popcorn's Guide to Parent Training. Very funny, very different to the other book. Dee also teaches writing classes for children. Dee White, what a delight to have you with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Lovely to be here.
All right, we're just going to go straight to it. How was Paris?
Oh, amazing, truly amazing. And to have a grant to go and spend a month researching the book that you're writing was just incredible. And to be able to sit in the places that you are writing about and have the smells and the sounds, and to be able to walk in your character's shoes as you're writing was just incredible. And, you know, just to speak to people about things and to find out what life was really like back then when the story was set. And there were just so many, it was just an eye-opener. And of course, being in Paris, you know, every writer's dream, really.
Bonus.
Yeah.
Dee, did you go to Paris already knowing the story, or did you find the story in Paris?
Well, I was actually in Paris, right, working on another another work in progress called Paris Hunting. And I was doing the research for that. That also has some World War II historical elements. And that's when I stumbled across this true story of Muslims at a Paris mosque who saved Jewish children. And I just thought, this is a story that I had to tell. My father, who grew up in Austria, or he was born in Vienna, and he and his family had to flee after Kristallnacht because of Hitler's invasion of Austria. So I kind of grown up with stories of, you know, what it was like to flee a country and to, you know, arrive in a land that you had no previous knowledge of, and to leave everything behind, your family, your friends, everything. So I think although Reuben's story is very different, I think I did draw on some of those experiences that my father shared with me.
So when you say you came across it, how did you stumble across it, the story?
Well, I was actually just researching, and I was researching World War II, and I think it was obviously because my other story is set in Paris as well. So I was researching World War II Paris, and I just came across all these information about this particular story, and I thought I just have to find out more about it. So I'd just been to Paris 2 years earlier. I'd spent all my money, and I thought, well, how am I going to get there? So I applied for a grant through Creative Victoria, and fortunately was successful, and I got to spend a month in Paris. So I'd already done a bit of research before I went. So I kind of had an idea of my character and what his journey might be. And I realised that at some point he would probably have to leave the mosque. So I had this idea that he would flee through the sewers, which I knew had happened. People had done that. So, but to get him from the mosque to where he needed to be, he had to actually get under the Seine, under the river that flows through Paris. So I contacted the Sewer Museum in Paris, and I asked them, you know, is there any places where the Seine, where the sewers flow under the Seine? And they said, yeah, there are 9 points. And they gave me information, and they said, if you're ever in Paris, do contact us and we shall take you on a tour of the sewers. And so, of course, when I was in Paris, I could not resist. I had to do that.
See, most of us go to the Eiffel Tower or, you know, the Louvre, but no, you went to the sewers. How was that to actually be in there where your character and, of course, the people who inspired it went?
It was certainly a different experience from the Eiffel Tower, and but it was really great to be able to absorb the atmosphere. You know, obviously it was smelly, it was slimy, it was grotty, but, you know, to see this, you know, the old staircases and the stonework and the way, like the sewer actually is quite different in different parts depending where you are. So some parts are rock and some parts there are ledges and some parts, you know, it's quite deep. And of course, while you're looking, there's all these things floating past and you don't really know what they are. You don't look too closely.
See, it's the rats that worry me. It's not the floating, it's the swimming and the scurrying.
Well, it wasn't, I guess, because it was a tour. So it's actually a museum they have there. So I think they keep it reasonably rat-free. But they did actually have an activity at the end. It was school holidays for to show children how to make origami rats. So, so that probably was the only rat I actually saw on the tour.
How much difference did it make to the writing?
I think it made a huge difference because when you're in a place, you can really step into your character's shoes and become that character. And you're not writing about what you think you know, you're writing about what you know, and you're there in it and you're there in the story. And so it's like just stepping into that story world, and it's there all around you. You don't have to make anything up, it's just there. So I think it just makes the writing so much more authentic. And also there are practicalities, you know, like when you're there, you can work out how things, you know, how things happen. So I actually thought that the Seine flowed the other way. And so I had to actually change my plot to make it work because I thought it flowed down to the south of France and it actually flows the other way. So, you know, it was, there are those kind of things that you don't know really when you're reading, you know, when you're reading about a place. It's like when I walked into the mosque, there's this smell of peppermint tea and, you know, the cooking that they do there at the mosque. And so they're the kind of things that you just can't possibly imagine unless you're there in the story.
How welcoming were people to have you, say, into the mosque and into the sewer, knowing what you were writing?
Well, the sewer tour people were very, very encouraging, and they actually gave me an interpreter and gave me the tour for free. And the interpreter they gave me was amazing. So her name was Letitia, and she was fabulous. And she said to me, look, I have some time off tomorrow and the day after. Is there anywhere else you'd like to go? And I, at this stage, had already spent 3 days at the mosque where they were very friendly. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. It's open to the public, but I don't speak French or Arabic. So trying to communicate was difficult, but I kind of went there with the feeling that I will somehow find my way into this story. And Letitia was really the key. So not only did she speak French and English, she spoke so many languages, including Arabic, and she was a Muslim. And so she took me into the mosque and we were able to find out certain things, not actually from the mosque. We found out, she helped me with a lot of the research.
How lucky. How lucky is that?
Very, very lucky.
Yeah.
So, but the mosque is it is very beautiful, and they have a tea room there where you can go and sit and, you know, and drink the tea and eat the beautiful foods that they prepare, and, you know, just really immerse yourself in that kind of, and that was part of what was in the story, you know, the food that they ate and all that kind of thing, and to look at where the gardens were and all that sort of thing. So some of the research I still did, like I had to not necessarily do it at the mosque. Some of it I did online. I had to find out when Ramadan was in 1942 and when the Jewish celebrations were in 1942. And I had to find out what sort of vegetables they might have grown at the mosque then, what the weather was like at that time of year in 1942. So there were all these things that I had to do to make the story authentic, and they just blended with what I found when I went there. Some of it I had, you know, some of it you did have to dig a little bit to get the information that you needed. One of the things I'd read about children that had been, or small children and small people who had been smuggled out of Paris in wine barrels. And so I thought, well, that's something that I would investigate. So I went to the wine market, and it was a little bit hard to find the actual, where the old wine market was. So I had to do a little bit of digging to find that and find information about how they actually used to load the barrels onto the barges and all that kind of thing. But even that, it was so good being there because you could just explore around the market and see where they may have come out of the the sewers, and I learnt to recognise where you could come out of the sewers, the metal plates on the roadways, which ones were the sewers and all that sort of thing. So it was all really, really interesting.
Oh, it's amazing. So Dee, with talking about this topic, and there's so many sensitivities about it, did you have to walk very carefully? Was it a fine line you were walking while you were investigating?
It really was, because in France, they didn't actually speak about the Holocaust until 1995. So it's only fairly recently that they've admitted that it's happened. And there are a few monuments there, but where the Veldiv Roundup, I don't know if you know much about that, that was in Paris in July 1942.
Was that the stadium where they were all in the
stadium where they held the Jews that they arrested? And that stadium's no longer there. But when we went there, there was a tiny, tiny little plaque, and so they were working to rebuild and to build a new monument to, adequately reflect what had really happened there. But so these things are fairly new. So the information really was not really readily available. I really had to find the right people. And Letitia was just an amazing source of information with everything. Like she said, so now we've been to the mosque, where else do you need to go? And I said, well, I'd like to go to a synagogue. And she said, well, my next door neighbour is the mother of a rabbin, so we can get you into his synagogue.
Wow.
So we went into a synagogue, and as soon as I walked in there, I thought, this is not Reuben's synagogue. It was very opulent. It was beautiful. It was just, I just thought, this is not Reuben's synagogue. And so it was about the last week we were in Paris, and an Orthodox Jewish man came up to us and he said to me, are you Jewish? And I said, well, I have Jewish ancestry. My grandparents were married in a synagogue. And he said, is there anything you'd like to know about the Jews of Paris? And I said, well, I'd love to see inside a synagogue. And so he said, come on, you can come and see inside my synagogue. And so his synagogue was called the 17 because it was at number 17, and it was an apartment. So we had to go up this narrow staircase into this. It was just like an apartment, but it was actually a synagogue. And I thought, this is Reuben's synagogue. And he said, you can sit here, you can take photos, you can stay as long as you like. And so it was just amazing. So all these things just kept happening that helped the research along. And I think that's the thing, if you're open and you're looking, it's amazing what you can find.
Yeah, that respectful, and people want to share. It's just being the right way of asking. So Dee, do you know how many children they actually were able to help?
No, I don't. It's like I said, because the Holocaust wasn't talked about for such a long time in France, that kind of information is quite sketchy. So there were children and there were adults, because the children they took in as their own, and they became members of the family of the people that lived and worked at the mosque. But they were children that didn't have parents. But the adults, they would find them identity papers and help them get through and get out of Paris. So there's not really any definite record of how many, but and that's the thing. There were so many people that helped the Jews, and like on the morning of the roundup, the aim was to arrest 28,000 people. They arrested 11,000, so which was still absolutely horrific. Or it might have been, I think it was 13,000, which was horrific. But that meant that there were thousands that actually were not arrested, and that was because of the kindness of people like the Muslims at the mosque who helped them escape.
Oh, it sounds absolutely incredible. I could talk about this all day, but we better move on to different topics.
Okay, I just want to go through a couple of other.
Oh no, please do, because it's fascinating.
Yeah, and so what I did was, apart from researching in Paris, I also went to the Holocaust Museum in New York, and I spent quite a bit of time at the Holocaust Centre in Melbourne, and I actually was put in touch with 2 Paris Holocaust survivors. So that was just such an amazing experience. Like Paul and Esther were wonderful, and they read my manuscript, and they, for cultural sensitivities, and they told me about things that, I mightn't have had completely right of how Paris was. And Esther said that she was actually sent out to the country to a convent to save her life. And she said that a child actually arrived in a wine barrel. And so it was so amazing for me, had done all this research and then created this fictional story to speak to someone that had actually witnessed that happening.
That's remarkable. How long did it take you, the writing?
The actual writing part was probably 2 years. So it was really, it took about 4 years from start to finish to getting it published. And that included, there was so much research and verification and, just bringing it all together.
Now, I must ask, on top of your stack of books, not the popcorn side, we're still on Beyond Belief, there's the most gorgeous black and white photo. Who's that? It's
actually my brother when he was 11, but that was my Reuben. So he's in my book trailer, and I like to have a photo of a character. It just helps me to imagine them and to walk in their shoes, and so that was, and my brother's very much like Reuben in the book. He's quite serious, but he's kind, and and that's what he was always like when he as he still is, but at that age he was very much like the character of Reuben, who's also a bit of a mixture of my boys as well. So.
Yeah, it's funny how your characters become such a mix of people.
They do.
Dee, now that you've finished it and it's out in the world, because clearly this is something that's very much part of your heart, how's it been going?
Well, of course, you never know. I have been getting lots of really beautiful reader feedback, and from people that had never heard the story, are amazed to hear it, are inspired by it. And it's a very heavy topic, but I wanted to write a story of hope, and it is very much a story of hope. So I've had some really lovely feedback from readers already. So
can't wait to get my hands on it. I find the whole thing just mesmerising. Of sitting here going, "Oh, tell me more," but we will move on.
Yes, I know we need
to. After writing such a heavy emotional topic, how did you approach Eddie Popcorn?
Well, Eddie actually started many years ago when my son was 11. So I think 11 and 12-year-old boys in particular, I've only had 11 and 12-year-old boys, are the funniest. They are just so funny. They're so smart, but they're not quite at the rebellious stage, but they're so observant and perceptive and funny and ironic. And so I think a publisher actually said to me once, "Do you have an 11-year-old boy living in your head?" And I said, "No, but I have one in my house." So, and that was kind of where that started. But it's funny because after, the book came out and I've been reading it, for various reasons, and I've started to realise that Eddie actually has a lot of me in him as well. So I was a quirky kid when I was 11 and just a little bit naughty too, just like Eddie. So
was it I guess fun? Was it good to do something light after something? There's some beautiful lightness clearly in Beyond Belief, but to do something frivolous almost after that, was that good?
It tends to be the way I write. So I have a serious book that I'm working on, and I tend to have something more lighthearted. And I find that really helps me have balance.
So you work on more than one project at once?
Usually, and sometimes it's out of your control too. I started Beyond Belief 4 years ago. I started Eddie at least 10 years ago, but they both came out within a month of each other. So, you don't actually have any control over that. And so I was actually working on the edits for Eddie Popcorn's Guide to Teacher Taming, working on the edits for Beyond Belief, and writing the second Eddie book at the same time. So
just don't confuse the two boys. Don't confuse Eddie and Reuben. It could have been, could not have gone well. Dee, one thing about your writing that I'm aware of with Leonardo as well, I give books nicknames, sorry, Letters to Leonardo as well, is your incredible research. Where does that desire for knowledge come from?
I think I've always had it. And I think even as a child, I like to read quite complex books. And I've always had an interest in mysteries. So I'm always, I think, looking for the truth and in things. And so, I mean, there's not really much of a mystery in Eddie, but obviously there's some mystery in Beyond Belief and in Letters to Leonardo. And I'm actually currently working on an adult mystery. So it's something I think, I think just knowledge is power. And, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. But it's also, I think it's just helpful to know things. And truth is always, I think, something that's been important to me, and it seems to be a theme that comes through in my writing. So I guess it's my quest for truth that sends me on the research process. But I just love it so much. I mean, like I was researching for Paris Hunting, and I came up with a story for Beyond Belief. So you just never know where research is going to take you.
No. So what's happening with Paris Hunting?
It's still a work in progress. So I've kind of got the story for that, but it needs to be reworked. So I know where I'm going with it, but I've basically had too many other things that I've been working on. So I've only recently just gone back to that as well.
Fantastic. And an adult book on the go as well. How are you finding going from an 11-year-old boy to writing for adults?
It's not that much of a difference, I don't think. Like, I mean, Beyond Belief is the same length as some adult books as far as word count goes. So the story is complex, the character's complex. I don't think it's a whole lot different. One of the main characters in my adult book is a 22-year-old man, and my son is 22 and he just moved home recently. So it's not that hard to make the transition, I don't think, because I think the principles are the same, really.
I think stories are stories. And I think too with kids writing, we'll put it the other way around. I think with writing for adults are a little more forgiving in that they will stick with a book a bit longer. But kids, you've got a page. You've got that page to grab them. And I think that's a great skill to go on to adult writing.
It's not as restrictive in some ways. Like, I love writing for children, but say, for example, writing Reuben's story. Now, that's set in a war zone, but I had to write in such a way that there were certain things that couldn't be depicted accurately, or they could be depicted, but they had to be depicted in a more careful way. Mm-hmm. So, with writing for adults, there's not those kind of restrictions.
Now, with all this going on in your world, are you still working with kids as well? Because I know that's a passion for you.
I am. And I've got quite a few new students recently because obviously with COVID-19, parents are looking for something, and it's parents all over the world. And I also mentor children, and I've just got a new student, and he's 7 and he's from America, and he wants to be a writer, an author. And so I had a Zoom session with him the other day, which was just lovely. And so that's a thing that when I first started writing classes for kids 10 years ago, there was no such thing as Zoom. So all the classes were done via email, but now, there's opportunities. I mean, it's still a lot of it's done via email because it's writing, but there are opportunities to meet your students through Zoom and, have a chat to them about their writing and what they're writing and what their aspirations are and things like that. So that's really rewarding. It was just lovely speaking to him. He was in America and he was so excited to speak to me, and it was just, really gorgeous. And I wouldn't normally work with kids that young because I said to his parents, he needs to be able to, we don't want to stifle his creativity. He needs to be able to write the stories that he wants to write. So they're happy with that. They're on board with that. And so with me, it'll just be really a matter of encouraging him. Yeah, and as you know, as an author, one of the hardest parts about writing a book is actually finishing it. And so I found this when I was writing as a kid, because as you mentioned, I've been writing since I was 7, that I had so many unfinished stories in exercise books all over the house because it's just really hard to finish a story. So I think that's something that I'll be able to help him with.
Dee, it has been lovely talking to you. I knew because of being locked away, I haven't got to Beyond Belief yet, but watching everything, I knew it was going to be a great read. Now talking to you, I'm right, got to get out, got to go buy a copy. Congratulations on it and on Eddie. Eddie is gorgeous as well.
Yeah, I've had lots of fun with Eddie. So I'm really enjoying working on the next one, which is Eddie Popcorn's Guide to Teacher Taming.
I might need to read that for when I'm doing workshops in the class.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Continued success, and I look forward to reading more fabulous reviews of Beyond Belief.
Thank you so much for having me.